From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm News Channel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. 150 years ago, Nashville and Franklin were the focus of the two last major battles to be fought in the Western theater of the American Civil War. A number of special ceremonies, even a reenactment or two, are being held to mark these occasions. But why is and why should the war between the states still be remembered a century and a half later? Why is it still important to us? And what happened at the battles of Nashville and Franklin? And what's it like to have lived in this area back 150 years ago? Joining us today on Inside Politics to discuss those topics in some detail are first, right next to me, Davidson County historian Dr. Carole Bucy, and next to her is Fisk University history professor Dr. Reavis Mitchell. Thank you both for coming on today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
So let's go with what I just said earlier. Why should we remember the Civil War today? Why is it important to us? Why is it important to the American experience today?
The Civil War was a turning point in United States history. It was a watershed. It changed what was unto what is today. As far as the African American population, the Civil War did what the American Revolution did not do. I was a slave at the end of the American Revolution, and as a result of the Civil War, I become free. That's a major milestone. That changed the American landscape.
Carole, how do you see the significance?
And we also see that this is a chance to talk about how different Tennessee and Nashville were from the other states that left the Union. Tennessee was more heavily divided over the issue of secession than other places in the country, and it's a lot of our history that we as Tennesseans don't even know.
I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the military parts of this, but let's focus a little bit on the battles of Franklin and Nashville. They both turned out to be pretty crushing defeats for the South. General John Bell Hood brought the Army up here from Georgia, while General Sherman, the federal officer, did his famous March to the Sea. Carole, what did General Hood hope to come by going in the opposite direction and going north?
Nashville had been occupied by the Union Army since March of 1862, early in the war. In some ways, that made Nashville one of the safest places in the South you could be, because the Union Army was given strict instructions to leave everybody alone as much as possible. So from that point forward, the Confederates' sole strategy was to retake Nashville. The symbolism of holding a Southern capital was not lost on anyone, including John Bell Hood nor Abraham Lincoln. And so Hood was part of a longer strategy that had been going on and failing since April of 1862, when the Battle of Shiloh took place.
Dr. Mitchell, General Hood came up here, but he's one of the few who made a direct attack on Nashville at all. I mean, even earlier in the war, they'd gone into Kentucky. There'd been battles all around Nashville, Murfreesboro, Shiloh, even down in Chattanooga. But if it was a goal of the Confederacy to take back Nashville, why did they try so few times?
Well, you got to look at the loss of life. You got to look at the strategic position. You got to look at the fact that you're moving people in and out. African Americans in large numbers are coming. I think Dr. Bucy's point is correct. The strategic lessons learned from the Civil War will echo in American military history until well after World War I. You look at the sort of the idea of human numbers and how many people you're going to sacrifice. You look at earth being burned and the burner strategy of Sherman. You look at the importance of being able to move men and supplies. And one strategic reason that the South had such difficulty in the Civil War is it didn't have a transportation system. You know, traveling down by rail, down to Chattanooga, traveling by rail anywhere in the South, without that ability, it wasn't the inability of the military leaders, it wasn't the number, it wasn't the valor of the Southern men, it was that they just couldn't move men and supplies.
Now, Carole, one of the ironies of the war, at least in terms of Nashville, was it fell early in the war because the Confederates did not have time to fortify it the way the Union did after they took over. And part of that was because Tennessee got into the Confederacy so late. We had a lot of discussion and controversies this summer about votes on our, in this fall about votes on our Constitution. Tennessee actually had to vote twice about leaving the Union.
That's right. Tennessee did have to vote twice. And Nashville is sort of an interesting piece within the state. East Tennessee had very few slaves, so they were staunchly Unionist. West Tennessee, where all the slaves lived, wanted to secede as soon as the elections was tallied for the election of Abraham Lincoln to become president. And Nashville was considered considered the Whig city of the South.
Yes.
Nashville was a strong political bastion of people who wanted government to be focused on business-related activities. So as a result of that, the Union Army being here in town really sort of took advantage of that, and we voted first in February not to even have a referendum, to have a convention to talk about leaving, and then after the attack on Fort Sumter in June, we just voted to leave the Union.
Tennessee, the last state to succeed and the first state to be readmitted. Tennessee didn't go through some of the problems with regard to slaves being property prior to the proclamation, the Emancipation Proclamation, which is an interesting document. The proclamation says if all southern states do not return by January the 1st, 63, the slaves in those southern states are free. None of the southern states returned. So, you know, it was a war of proclamations and responses, and even for the African Americans, you had to figure if Southern Proclamation said if you're caught in arms, you're considered carrying on treasonous actions, because many of those African Americans who were fighting on both sides were Southerners, were from Southern states. So your state controlled your action, not a federal government.
Now, you had all this large increase in African American population in Nashville during the war. Suddenly there's this Southern Army coming up. They're first in Franklin, then they're right outside the city. Was there concern in the black community about what that might, was there fear about what might happen? Was there fear of retributions by the white people within Nashville that might rise up?
There was fear that if the South won the Civil War, martial law would be put in place and you would be taken as property, not by your plantation owner or the family you've been a part of, because I tell people slavery is like being in a dysfunctional family. It's the only thing you know. They were just as fearful of the North, of the North, but they were just as fearful of being found insurrected in the South. So it was great nervousness, great tenseness here in Nashville. People talk about Fort Nicolay, but many of those African Americans who built that fort were impressed in the service. They didn't volunteer. He had the North in control. They were impressing him in the service. So it's a very complicated war.
Let's take a brief break. We're talking with two historians here in Nashville about what's going on with the sesquicentennial, observing 150 years since the Battle of Franklin and the Battle of Nashville. Back to continue our conversation with Reavis Mitchell and with Carole Bucy after this break.